Welcome back for our next video lesson. Today we're going to be discussing formal triangle proofs using the reflexive and vertical angle properties. And we're also going to be focusing on how triangles are congruent using our properties we discussed previously, which are side, 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 angle, 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 side, and HL. Those are always going to be our final reasons why we can say that triangles are congruent, and we're building up to those points. Let's go ahead and get started. To begin with, let's look at what a formal proof for a triangle will look like. We have our two columns here, so we have our statements and our reasons, and we're going to be writing down our statements. Our first statement is always going to be our given, so we know that FE is congruent to CB, and AB is congruent to DE, and finally CA is congruent to FD. So I'm going to write that all down as my given information. So for statement number one, again we have FE is congruent to CB, AB is congruent to DE, and then I'll write it above here. We have CA is congruent to FD. And a reason for the first statement is always going to be given. Okay, so once we finished our statement and reason, I'm going to go ahead and mark our triangle with what we said. We just said that FE is congruent to CB. We also know that AB is congruent to DE. And finally, CA is congruent to FD. Looking at our triangles, we can go ahead and go to our proved now. We can prove that triangles ABC and DEF are congruent. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. So ABC is congruent to DEF. And the reason, if we look at our triangles, the reason that our triangles are congruent is simply going to be side, side, side. So after we've marked our triangles and we've gone through all the information that's been given to us, we want to analyze if we can say they're congruent using one of our properties. Okay, for our second proof, we have a different set of given information. We have FE is congruent to CB, AB is congruent to DE, and angle CBA is congruent to angle FED. So once again, we're going to start by writing down our given information. We know, again, FE is congruent to CB, and then AB is congruent to DE, and I'll write up here again, angle CBA is congruent to angle FED. And once again, our reason is going to be given. Okay, like before, I'm going to go ahead and mark our triangles. So I have FE and CB are congruent. And then I have AB and DE are congruent. And for my angles, I have CBA, which is this bottom one, and also FED. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my triangles now and see if I can determine if they're congruent based off our patterns. For my first triangle, I have a side and then an angle and another side. For my second triangle, again, I have a side, an angle, and a side. So since they both have side, angle, side as their pattern, and that is one of our theorems, I can go ahead and say that those triangles are in fact congruent. So we can write down our proof, which is ABC is congruent to DEF. And again, the reason we can say that is by the side, angle, side property. Okay, before we jump into our next proof, we're going to review the concept of vertical angles. So for vertical angles, again, they are angles that are formed by two intersecting lines. For the first diagram, we can see these red angles here are in fact our vertical angles, and vertical angles are always going to be congruent. If you look at our second diagram, we don't have anything marked yet, but we can see our lines intersect, and these inside angles here are going to be our vertical angles, and they're again going to be congruent. So if we see that a diagram has vertical angles, we can say that as a statement, the angles are congruent, and then our reason is going to be that vertical angles are congruent. Let's go ahead and see this in a proof. Okay, so for example number 3, we have some given information again. We have side AP is congruent to PE, and then angle APB is congruent to angle EKP. I can't fit this all in my little box, so I'm just going to draw an arrow. I'm going to cheat, and then the reason again is going to be given. But we would write down each of those statements. Okay, I'm going to mark my triangles now. So I know that AP and PE are congruent, and then ABP, which is going to be this angle, and EKP, that angle, is going to be congruent. All right, looking at our triangle, I have a side and I have an angle, and then again I have a side and an angle. That's not enough information. So we need to try and find something else we can say. And this is where our vertical angles will come into play. I know that I have some vertical angles here. So I can say as a statement that angle APB is congruent to angle EPK. The reason we can say they're congruent is because we have vertical angles. And I'll abbreviate angles. All right, now that we have that listed, if we look at our pattern, we have an angle, and a side, and then we have another angle, and a side. So then we have to think about, is that a pattern? Is angle, side a way we can say triangles are congruent? And the answer is yes. So I can move on to my proof now and write that down, which is that APB is congruent to EPK, and that is because of the pattern of angle, side. Okay, so here's the same diagram, but we have some different information. Again, we're going to be using the vertical angle property to prove these triangles are congruent. Starting with our given, again, we have AP is congruent to PE, BP is congruent to KP, and that is going to be given. And again, guys, you will be writing down those statements. I just didn't leave myself enough room. Okay, before I move on to statement number 2, I'm going to mark my triangle. AP and PE are congruent, and then BP and KP are congruent. Okay, so now I have two sides, which is not enough information. But again, looking at our diagram, because we have lines that are connected, we can see that in this middle area here, we have some vertical angles. So I can go ahead and mark those as being congruent. And for my statement, again, we have the same two angles. So it would be angle APB is congruent to angle EPK. And the reason is because they are vertical angles. All right, now we can look at our proof. Analyzing our pattern, we have a side and then an angle and then a side. And for your second triangle, we have a side, an angle, and another side. Side angle side is one of our patterns, so we can say that triangle APB is congruent to triangle EPK. And again, the reason is because of side angle side. For our next set of proofs, we're going to be using the reflexive property. And just to review that, if we have two triangles that share a side, then that side is congruent to itself. So if we look at a first diagram, they share this side right down the middle. And since they share that side, it is congruent to itself, so we can mark it as being congruent. For our second diagram, we have a similar situation where they share this side. And so we can go ahead and mark that as being congruent because of the reflexive property. All right, let's see how this would work in a proof. Okay, step one for our proofs is always to write down our given information. For our given information here, we see that AX and AY are congruent, XM and YM are congruent, so we should write those down as our given information. And then XM. Okay, and our first reason is always going to be given. I'm going to go ahead and mark those sides. So we have AX and AY, and then we also have XM and MY. Currently, we have two sides, which is not enough information, but we do notice that these two triangles share the side down the middle. So we can go ahead and mark those as being congruent. And then I would just say that AM is congruent to MA, and the reason is because of the reflexive property. All right, now looking at our triangle, we can see that we have, for one of our triangles, side, side, side. For our other triangle, also side, side, side. So we can say that our triangles are congruent by the side, side, side property. So AXM is now congruent to AYM. And again, that is because of the side, side, side property. All right, for our final proof here, again, the same diagram, so we can see the reflexive property, but a different set of given information. I don't think I have enough space, but I would write this down. So we would say that AMX is congruent to AMY, and then XAM is congruent to YAM. Again, our reason for that is because it's given information. I'm going to go ahead and mark those angles. AMX is going to be this one, and then AMY is that one. And then we have XAM, which is up at the very top, and YAM, which is also at the very top. Okay, so currently I have two angles, which is not enough information. But once again, we have the same diagram, so we know that they share this side right down the middle, which means I can mark that as being congruent, and that's my next statement. AM is congruent to MA because of the reflexive property. And now that I have my triangles marked, I have angle, side, angle. For my second triangle, again, angle, side, angle, which is one of our reasons to say triangles are congruent. So we can move on to our prove and say that AXM is congruent to AYM, and that is because of the angle, side, angle property. Okay, so just to kind of summarize here, what we're doing is writing down our given, and then if that is enough information, we can move straight to the prove. If it's not, then we are looking for either a reflexive side or a set of vertical angles, which would be our second statement. And then that should lead us to a pattern that we can use for our final statement, which would be that the triangles are congruent, and then your reason is whatever the pattern is. All right, guys, go ahead and give the worksheet a try, and then make sure you complete it. Good luck.